So yeah, I wanted to give a talk about something that isn't cool, like HTML5 or JavaScript. I also realized talking about an HTML element at a JavaScript conference is risky. I didn't actually expect them to my talk to even get accepted, so then I had to write something about iframes. But kind of in a way, iframes is all about JavaScript. Like we hack the fuck out of it, and it does magical things. But Eamon of FunConf did actually call me out on this, and I realized that now I've got my hipster badge properly achieved now. So that's me. Right. Okay, so, oh. I did that about 4 a.m. last night. Right. So the reason I'm talking about iframes is because I built a tool called sbin actually to help my colleagues, instead of describing in English what the problem was with their bugs, actually give me some code so I could edit it and so on. So this is sbin in 2008, and this is sbin in 2010, and this is sbin in 2012. So now, there is a lot of iframe action going on inside of sbin, and I kind of learned a lot. Not learned a lot. Like I've been fucking with iframes since 2000-something. So I wanted to share some of the things that I've done. I wanted to share some of the stories that people have shared with me, and it's just a kind of share the nasty iframe hacks talk. That's what this talk is. I'm not going to be talking about any of the cool stuff that's coming in browsers. There is actually a really good slide deck that I'll point to at the end of this. This is all about the old busted shit that we do. So this is the history of the web. All these beautiful lines, and here you can see in 1996, frame sets. And as uncool as frame sets are, the reason, well, they were introduced in Netscape 2, and the reason they were there is, as far as I understand, is that the internet connections were pretty crappy, and they didn't want to reload entire pages every time. So they created a frame set so that you can have a static block across the top and a static sidebar, static footer, and you could reload just the center block of content, the content part, which sounds awfully familiar, right? That sounds like Ajax that we have, today. The downside is how we, screwed up Ajax. It doesn't link very well, and people were, losing the actual navigation and so on. So it's all being deprecated and shouldn't really work, but it does work on an iPhone 4, which I was amazed. It's completely, it's not. We haven't got position fixed through hacking frame sets, but it does actually work in brand new browsers. So old, crappy, busted technology works in new browsers. Anyway, so iframes. We get iframes in 1997 via IE3, I believe. Scott Isaac, I think the Wikipedia page suggests that the I is from Isaacs. But I spoke to Chris Wilson at Microsoft, and he said no. Otherwise, CSS would be CSS Wilson something. They don't name their products after themselves, so it's just iframes. And the iframe was deprecated in XHTML 1.1, so we were going to lose iframes in HTML as we know and love. But IE, being the amazing browser that it is, didn't really support the alternative. So the object element was supposed to be the alternative to iframes, and because IE7 fucked it up a little bit, it had the rest of the browser supported iframes, and we continue to have iframes today for some of the crazy stuff that we're doing with iframes. So if anyone's written any bookmarklets, this is the kind of thing that I was writing. So to inject my bookmarklet into the page, I was writing document.getElement by tag name head and then append child. For some reason, I thought I'd read, back in early 2000, this is because of frame sets, because there's no body element here, right? So if you try and inject into the body, it's not there, and your bookmarklet would fail. Something I came across just recently is that if you do want to use frame sets still, I know this is an iframe talk, but if you want to use frame sets, document.body, which is in IE5 and above, but document.body points to the frame set, even though it's not the body element. So if you want to write bookmarklets with document.body, you can do that. Right, but, OK, this is what really showed us that iframes are really quite powerful if you force them to do things they're not supposed to do. So Comet exists, or we could make use of Comet using iframes. And this is an early snippet. Well, it's an abstraction of a snippet. Basically, create the iframe, point it to a streaming server. Because of progressive rendering in the browser, you could give it a script tag, it would then execute the scripts, and you would pass that data about. So, prices, for instance, live prices. And now on the server, of course, we can use Node, and we can create these active sessions and just kind of push up data to the browser. Alex Russell coined the term Comet in 2006, but the more you search on the web, you see examples of Comet iframe hacks going way back to 2000, which is pretty impressive, I think. Probably one of the best hacks inside of Gmail at the time in 2006 is, I don't know if this is true, but apparently Google brought up the last few IE engineers to solve this kind of, the clicking problem that you hear in IE when you hit refresh. It kind of gives a click noise. And because they were using iframes that were hidden away on the page to basically keep the connection open, get the new email, you'd have to reload the iframe every now and then, otherwise memory would go like ape shit, and you had to kind of close the connection. So you'd hear this little like click, 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 click. And what the Gmail code had inside of it was an iframe gets created. Then inside of that, they put an ActiveX object, the HTML file ActiveX object, which is opened, and then an iframe is put inside of that points to the live stream of data. And when that reloads, the ActiveX HTML file thing it suppresses the noise. So they solved this with like iframe, ActiveX, iframe, probably an iframe somewhere else as well, just to keep the iframe stack going. But that was pretty cool and a bit balmy. And like, who would know that? So these are my experiments with iframes that are public. 2007, I was working with a lot of other developers, and like polluting global scope is a bad thing, sort of. Anyway, I needed to work out where the variables were being introduced, and that came out of basically using an iframe to detect where the global variables were being introduced by comparing them against the current global scope. And Kagax, I don't know how you pronounce that, perfectionkills.com, he then took that a few years later and kind of cleaned it up and fixed it and made it better. So some of the things I'm going to talk about in this part are partly iframe hacks that I've come across, and also kind of my experience of JSBin and how I'm using iframes to share with you guys and girls and so on. So probably, I mean, you may have heard of this one already. This is not obviously JSBin. The Samsung S3 remote wipe. You send someone an HTML page with that has that phone, it will just wipe their phone back to factory settings. And the clap is for the engineers that let that one through. This isn't an HTML deck, by the way. I had to screencast a GIF and make a video and put that in Keynote. So, but there are a few things like this where you can kind of point an iframe to something and it will kind of somehow work. And there was a time in iOS that if you wanted to play background music on your web page, which I know there's a lot of you that want to do that, you could point the iframe to an MP3 or a WAV file, and it would just play it in the background of the iPhone. Pretty awesome. They did either fix it or break it, depending on like how much music you like in your web pages, but it doesn't work anymore, unfortunately. So the iframes that I work with are often like dynamically generated. So you create an iframe, you drop it into the DOM, and you start writing like HTML into it or whatever you want to do. But the way that you write to it is you need to get the window object for that iframe. But you can only get it once it's inside the DOM. So if you don't put the iframe into the DOM, the window for that iframe does not exist. So this is how you get it out. This will be some code where I'm injecting some HTML, basically. This awesome HTML is my awesome HTML. And this is fundamentally what JSBin does. As you type, it just makes an iframe and keeps kind of injecting your code as you go along. It's kind of not a quirk. This is obvious when you think about it, but the load event doesn't fire on the iframe until you close, like do document.close, once you've finished writing to it. And the reason that's obvious is that when you have a web page and it's taking a long time to load, like if it keeps the connection open, the load event doesn't fire because it's still loading, right? So we've got the same problem. Until we hit the close, until we call close, the load event won't fire. So that's something to, if you're listening for when it's loaded, to pull stuff out again. So you don't have the window object until you put it into the DOM, but equally, if you take that iframe out of the DOM, the whole thing gets destroyed. And again, it kind of makes sense. It's like hitting close on a tab. You basically close that window entirely, or any JavaScript that was running has been killed. And when you put it back in the DOM, it'll just rerun everything as if you just hit refresh, basically. I included this slide. I found this weird bug, which really doesn't apply to anyone except for me. But if you, what is it, like some WebKit browser and Opera, they ignore the MIME type on CSS. Basically, the point of this is that if you have an iframe and you're rendering, if you're doing kind of live previews or rendering HTML into an iframe, it's not the exact same thing as the full kind of web page. An iframe is very slightly different to the regular kind of web view. In a way, like mobile Safari is different to a web view, for instance. So I want to talk about some of the preview stuff I do in JSBin. So JSBin, if you type, it renders live preview as you're coding. So you change some CSS, it will actually make the change immediately, which is, we're in this kind of like impatient era where everything needs to be live and real time. So achieving that takes a few kind of little hacks. The first one was iframes don't know, half the browsers, the iframe doesn't know how wide it is. So if you have something like a canvas that you want to do at full width, so the code runs, you do canvas.width equals window.innerHTML, inner width. WebKit browsers and Opera, one of the other browsers, they don't know about the width. It's 0 until the next tick. So, like process.nextTick or set timeout, so on. So I wrote this pretty clever code that makes another iframe, sets a callback, and on my window object, and when the iframe runs, it calls that callback with the width of the iframe, and if it's 0, it says, don't run the code. So I have this bit that says, if there's an active delay, then do a set timeout 0. Otherwise, run the code immediately. And I say clever code because actually it's a complete waste of time. All I should have done is set timeout, run. So that was basically me just trying to be too clever for my own good. And I only realized that whilst writing this deck. But if you're doing anything where you actually need to know the width, you need to wait until the next render. Yeah. So what I do in JSBin to make sure that you don't block, so when you're typing, if you had an alert box, as you type your code, it could just bring up an alert box and entirely block the UI. You wouldn't be able to continue typing. It would be a pain in the ass. So I actually put in a script just at the top of everything, just at the top before your code, that just sets alert, confirm, and prompt, and maybe the print box as well, to like an empty function, basically, like a no-op function. And then at the end of the code, I actually remove it. So an alert box can run, but it won't run whilst you're typing, so you don't have this kind of interruption. Oddly, Opera completely suppresses alerts or any blocking dialogue inside of an iframe, which also suggests that the iframe is slightly different again to the main window. So I haven't really bothered checking how far different it is, but it's a different environment, basically. I remove autofocus when I'm dropping it into the iframe, so I'm looking at your HTML and I'm removing the autofocus again, because if you're typing away on one side, you don't want the cursor to suddenly jump to an input element, right? And I spoke to Richard Worth at the last JSConf in the US, who was working on jQuery UI, and as he was coding, he would be using the jQuery dialog plugin, which would then grab focus. So anything that grabs focus in your live render is going to take you away from your coding, basically. So I cancel any focus events on the window object inside of the iframe. And you just do that by doing window dot add event listener or dot just on focus, and then cancel the event. It means that it'll focus all the way through the iframe, but it won't force focus on the kind of the outer window, the window that we're working in, basically. I do things like restoring scroll positions, because if you've got like a long page and you're coding, you're re-rendering iframes, you want to get it at the same point. So that's kind of live rendering. These are other tricks that we can use iframes. Like I said, Kangax upgraded the script. You basically create an iframe to detect globals. All it does is compare all the global variables on the window element compared to the iframe, and the difference is any newly introduced global variable. PhoneGap uses iframes. Well, Cordova uses iframes in iOS. But the interesting bit, I was talking to Brian last night. If there's a network request made whilst you have input focus, so you have the keyboard up, if there's a network request that's made, the keyboard will drop away. But this only happens in the web view, not in Safari, like the main browser, which may not be a problem, except Chrome for iOS is a web view. So this actually is happening to JSBin at the moment, because as you type, it's saving, and it's doing an XHR save. So you have focus, you're typing some code, and then the keyboard just vanishes. And then you tap, and it brings back, and you type, and it vanishes. Because it's doing an XHR request, it's doing a network request. And the way that the PhoneGap guys solved this problem is you just wrap it in an iframe, of course, right? That will solve every problem eventually. If you put the network request inside of the iframe, keyboard stays there. Random. I wanted in JSBin to be able to point, like in the URL, just do JSBin, gist, and the ID of a gist. And I want to just suck the gist into JSBin. Now, either because I'm lazy or because it didn't exist, and it's probably the former, I didn't bother looking at the proper API that GitHub provide. And it's possible that it wasn't there in the first place. But they do have a script embed. So you can embed gists onto your website. And equally, like Language, you can embed, like this conference is doing, embedding the actual upcoming talks. If you put that in an iframe, because everything belongs in an iframe, you can wait until it's loaded and then drop into the iframe, because it's all hidden away, and pull all of that content out again, but as an object or as an API. So you can create an API. If a website provides a script include that will just kind of like drop in a bunch of HTML, if you put that into an iframe, wait for the iframe to load, you can traverse the DOM nodes that are in there and pull them out as just values, as an object that represents like the upcoming talks, and you can present it in your own way. So basically creating third-party custom APIs out of third-party script embeds. The only thing I have been told to say is there's usually T's and C's that require you kind of credit Lanyard, for instance. So just read those and don't blame me if you get into trouble. Cross-domain communication is kind of the big bit that iframes are good for. I've used this with JS consoles, it's just a full-screen console. I could write some JavaScript. Again, out of laziness, I was asked to debug an Android app. I couldn't be bothered to read the documentation for the SDK to work out how console.log works. So I changed JS console to have this remote feature, which you just drop in a script tag into your page, and the console is able to control the mobile phone. And console.logs come out into the desktop. But I did that with a bunch of iframes. And I think sock.js and maybe socket.io use iframes as like the last resort to solve some of these problems. You're going to have to bear with my diagram here, right? So there's a video of the remote working, but you include this script that points to jsconsole.com, and that creates a console object and kind of overrides the actual one inside of your page. But it creates an iframe that points back to jsconsole.com and then uses post message and on message to communicate in and out of that iframe. And then the iframe can then point back to jsconsole.com and communicate using Ajax posts and event source. The reason I jumped through all these hoops to do this is because I wanted to be able to test this on phones like a Windows Phone or old Android phones that don't have, I think, don't have Flash. So I couldn't polyfill WebSockets, for instance. So I'm using a combination of like iframes, post message and on message, event source, and Ajax to get a message, like basically WebSockets. Yeah. With JSBin again, I wanted to be able to support pointing a phone at the URL that you're working on at the time. So you're writing some code. I want to be able to point that phone at that code and have it kind of live render. And it does that now, but the way I first looked at it is by wrapping it in an iframe and having the iframe keep an active connection to the server and just, the top level window would then just reload the iframe the whole time. And the first problem I encountered was the viewport is ignored when a window is in an iframe on a phone. So the text was really small, obviously didn't work as a solution, so I threw that away as a bug. But actually, someone sent me a tweet saying they use iframes around windows on phones to be able to see the full view of a page. So it's kind of a bug or a feature depending on how you look at it. If you actually want to see the full width of a page because you don't want to have like a mobile version, stick it in an iframe. So the document.domain thing, this is what allows like twitter.com to talk to an iframe that points to api.twitter.com, for instance. What they do is just on both windows, they just say document.domain equals twitter.com, and at that point, they have the same origin rules that allows them to dip inside of each other, call methods, and so on. So that's kind of the opener to cross-domain. Not quite cross-domain, but like between CNAMEs, basically, to be able to communicate between iframes. Comet's obviously for me at least, the most impressive thing that's come out of iframes. And I stole this from Alex Sexton's talk, which I have a link in the notes, but that's no good to you. Basically, it boils down to this is kind of how Comet would work. If A.com is your website and B.com is your live server that can stream data up, you can then put an iframe inside of B.com and send it data, and A.com at the bottom can talk to A.com at the top. Basically, if it's on the same origin, it can penetrate all the way down and all the way back up again, which is kind of weird. You can have, like Paul was talking about having lots of nested iframes, but A.com can point back to A.com at the top level by just doing top dot call some function, give it some data. But you need to know your way through all of those iframes. You need to be able to actually talk to them by name to get through. I have some examples that I might post out later to prove this. And this is if you want to, there's a weird hack. I don't understand why this works, but if you want to communicate with an iframe and give it some data, regardless of whether it's on the same origin or not, if you do window.name and give it some data, the iframe will have access to that. So this works across domain, which I don't understand why. I think it might just be broken in every browser. So you have an iframe pointing to twitter.com, and if you immediately do iframe, point to the DOM node and do .name equals some data, like JSON string, twitter.com will be able to read window.name, and it will contain that data. And also, it's a way of passing data to an iframe before the actual load event fires. So if it's like a long-lasting iframe, you can pass in data to window.name, and it will have it up front, basically. It will have it before the DOM has loaded or anything like that. Yeah, weird. Clickjacking, obviously one of the coolest things we got out of iframes. Stick an iframe on top of a button. You've tweeted for me. You've pooped yourself. But that's preventable in IE9 and above, and by above I mean everyone else, of course. By just sending a header that says, you can't load this unless you're on the same origin. So Google.com, Twitter.com, they all send this header, which means that if I put an iframe around it, it's not going to load. It just fails to load. It throws an exception, and nothing happens at all. So this is probably one of the newer interesting hacks that I've seen iframes being used for. you can use it. Right, this is a little bit tricky, but you can use it to have URLs that have unknown paths, like JSBin has like /abc/1 or 2 and so on. You can have it load your manifest using an iframe. All right, so basically you have your regular application. Okay, this comes from Lanyard and Jake Archibald. He mentions it in his douchebag talk. I talked to him in a bit more detail, and this is how it works. So you have your application Chrome. So JSBin, the user content is just a JSON include. So the whole application is the Chrome. So if that could work offline, all I would need is the URLs to work and the user content to work. So the root path is my application Chrome. On any URL that isn't on the root path, so /abc/1, you include an iframe that points to a very light page, maybe not actually the app, but just a very light page. It has a manifest inside of it, and the manifest points to your application Chrome, so the assets, the JavaScript, and the HTML that actually drives that Chrome, that app. And the manifest says fallback anything on the root path to the root URL. So this bit here says if I go to jsbin.com/abc/10 and I'm offline, it will serve up the web page that's on this URL. So any URL now works, and my content is coming back, and it means that I can basically have support unknown URLs inside of JSBin, or this is what they're doing for Lanyard. So if there's an event that isn't already in your cache and you haven't got an internet connection, they can still serve up the application Chrome, basically. And it kind of works as well. It would help to see some code, but I'm not going to show you any code. But in theory, you should be able to use that same iframe technique to basically keep a hot cache of like a very large JavaScript library. You could have it in a hidden iframe, always available and always being delivered to your main application. This is just a theory. I do want to have a play, but this is kind of the newest thing I've seen iframes being used. So the good parts, I'm just going to mention them. There's a really, really good slide deck that you can get quite a bit of information out of just like looking at the slides. They talk about how they implement iframes with Discuss. But there's post message and on message, which has some decent support-ish. There's a seamless property, which basically gets rid of the border as far as I can tell. I think you're supposed to be able to use CSS to style all the way into the iframe. Source doc means that you can put HTML on an attribute of an HTML tag, which looks ugly as fuck. And then we've got these sandbox properties, which stop JavaScript from running if we don't want it, if it's an untrusted domain. So that's my my kind of like brain fart on iframe hacks. The one big one that I didn't include actually is sandboxing. So basically creating a sandbox to create like a fresh, perfectly clean version of an array object. Dean Edwards did a lot of work on this a while back, but I wanted to talk about some kind of the weird bits. So that's me done. I can't see a fucking thing.